Hey, let's jump in. Drizzle tapped against the windshield of the old bus as it wound its way up the mountain roads. Ruthie Carter sat in the back row, her hands clutching the worn leather handle of her old suitcase resting on her lap. She stared out the window where towering pine trees blocked out the overcast sky, as if trying to separate the outside world from the place she was heading to, the Langston estate. That suitcase, her only remaining possession from her once glorious days as a sought-after chef in San Francisco, now symbolized the fragile beginning of a new opportunity. But was it truly an opportunity, or merely a temporary escape from her personal collapse? 3 months ago, Ruthie had been standing in the gleaming kitchen of Etoile, a restaurant where the scent of herbs and the sizzle of hot oil blended into a symphony she conducted. But a false accusation that she had faked the origin of ingredients to boost her reputation spread like wildfire. The truth that her ex-fiancé, a business partner, had betrayed and framed her didn't matter to anyone. Customers disappeared, the restaurant fired her, and her friends slowly distanced themselves. Now at 32, Ruthie felt like a ghost, erased from society. The job listing had appeared like a faint light in the darkness. A crumpled local newspaper, left on a coffee table in the cheap inn where she was staying, featured a short ad. Housekeeper and cook needed at the Langston estate. High pay, room and board included. Contact Pete Hammond. No details, no address, just a phone number. Ruthie had called immediately, her voice shaky but firm, and Pete, a man with a gravelly, warm voice, simply said, "If you've got the guts to come, the job is yours." Got the guts! Those words echoed in Ruthie's mind as the bus stopped at a tiny station along the mountain road. She stepped off, the chill of the altitude seeping through her thin coat. A rusty pickup truck, driven by Pete, was already waiting. The weathered-faced, silver-haired man gave her a silent nod. "You Ruthie Carter?" he asked, his eyes scrutinizing. When she nodded, he pointed to the passenger seat. "Hop in. It's a long drive." On the way, Pete offered a few guarded words about the Langston estate. "It's not a place for just anyone," he said, eyes fixed on the narrow dirt path. "Dozens have tried. No one lasted more than a week. The owner, he's not exactly welcoming." Ruthie swallowed hard, remembering the whispers she'd overheard in town about Wade Langston, the former CEO of Neurocore, a giant in the AI industry, who had become a recluse after an unspoken tragedy. His estate, built with cutting-edge eco-technology, was said to resemble a fortress frozen in time. "Is the boss really that strange?" Ruthie asked, trying to keep her voice even. Pete glanced at her, the corners of his mouth twitching into a rare smile. "Strange? Number just broken, but you'll see for yourself." The estate appeared around a bend, like a modern dream carved from glass and steel. Solar panels shimmered under the pale light, and the glass walls reflected the surrounding forest, making the house nearly blend into nature. But something about the beauty felt hollow, like a home without breath. Pete stopped the truck at the main gate and helped Ruthie carry her suitcase into the foyer. "Your room's on the first floor, end of the hall," he said. "The boss will meet you in the dining room at 6. Ruthie spent a few hours unpacking in the small but comfortable room. A single bed, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the cliffside. She opened her suitcase and took out a weathered recipe notebook, a keepsake from her mother who had taught her how to cook, and gently ran her fingers over the worn leather cover. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, trying to summon courage. But her heart still pounded as the clock struck 5:50. The dining room was spacious and minimalistic, with a long oak table that could seat 20, though only 2 chairs were placed facing each other. The light from the crystal chandelier cast cold shadows across the marble floor. Ruthie stood by the door, fingers intertwined tightly, waiting. At exactly 6, a man entered. Wade Langston was taller than she had imagined, with tousled black hair that partly obscured his forehead and storm-gray eyes. He wore a black shirt and slacks, but his polished appearance couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into his features. He looked at Ruthie with a sharp, unreadable gaze devoid of warmth. "You're the new one," he said, his voice deep and steady, like reading a notice. "The rules aren't negotiable. Pete will give you the task list. Do your job well, and we won't have any issues." Ruthie nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. I understand, Mr. Langston. I'll do my best. He didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the vast room. Ruthie exhaled slowly, as if she had just passed an invisible test. She didn't know how long she could survive here, but one thing was clear. She hadn't come to quit. The Langston estate, cold and mysterious as it was her final chance to reclaim what she'd lost. Not just her reputation, but herself. She stepped into the hallway, the light from the window casting a glow across her face, reflecting a flicker of resolve. Tomorrow will be different, she whispered, her hand tightening around the recipe notebook in her pocket. In a place where no one dared to stay, Ruthie Carter had chosen to begin again. Morning light filtered through the large kitchen windows of the Langston estate, casting a glow on the stainless steel surfaces that gleamed beneath a fine layer of dust. Ruthie Carter stood in the middle of the vast space, her hands gently gliding across the cold granite countertop. This kitchen, with its modern equipment, from dual ovens with thermal sensors to a high-tech food processor, should have been a dream for any chef. But it carried the weary air of a place long forgotten, as if time had stopped since the last cook walked out. Ruthie could feel it, not just in the dust, but in the suffocating stillness of the room. That morning, Pete Hammond, the estate's caretaker, had handed her a list of tasks scribbled on graph paper. "Dinner at 7, he said, voice even but eyes laced with curiosity. "The boss doesn't like to wait." Ruthie nodded, tucked the list into her jacket pocket, and began inspecting the kitchen. She opened pantry doors to find premium ingredients nearing expiration: Italian olive oil, dried herbs from Provence, and a few rare spices she used to dream of working with at Etoile. The fridge, however, was nearly empty. Just a few eggs, some vegetables, and an already opened bottle of white wine. "Someone's neglected this place far too long," she murmured, feeling both a pang of sadness and a spark of determination. While cleaning the countertops, Ruthie discovered a small notebook tucked away in the bottom drawer. Its blue leather cover was worn at the corners, but the pages inside were intact, filled with delicate handwritten notes. She flipped to a random page. Tomato basil soup, E's favorite on rainy days. Beside the recipe, a small note read, "Wade always adds a bit of cream to soften the tang." Ruthie smiled, picturing a woman, perhaps Elizabeth, Wade's late wife, carefully recording the family's culinary moments. She decided then to make the soup for dinner, not just for its simplicity, but because of a quiet intuition. Maybe this dish could offer something more than just a meal. Ruthie got to work. She washed the tomatoes, diced the onions, and finally chopped the fresh basil she found growing in a small pot on the porch. The scent of olive oil heating in the pan made her feel more like herself again, as if this unfamiliar kitchen was still a place she could belong. She added a touch of cream to the soup, just as the note had said, and paired it with a green salad dressed in a light lemon vinaigrette. The meal was simple but crafted with care, elevated with the fine dining finesse she had once taken pride in. At 6:45, she set the table in the large, austere dining room, placing the bowl of soup and the salad plate before Wade's chair. A small candle was lit, not for romance, but to soften the cold edges of the space. Wade entered at precisely 7, dressed again in his minimalist black suit, his storm gray eyes sweeping over the table. He sat down without a word, picked up the spoon, and began to eat. Ruthie stood quietly in the corner, heart thudding. Every spoonful he lifted felt like an eternity. Wade ate slowly, expressionless. But what struck Ruthie most was that he didn't stop. The soup bowl emptied, and he even touched the salad. When he stood up, he offered no comment, no thank you, only a slight nod before leaving the room. But for Ruthie, that small nod felt like a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had done something right. The next morning, Ruthie returned to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. She froze when she saw the dishes from the night before, cleaned and stacked neatly on the drying rack. It wasn't her, and Pete had gone back to town overnight. That left only one possibility: Wade. The small, silent gesture warmed her. She began preparing breakfast, toast with eggs and some homemade jam from a jar she found, when Pete walked in, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. You did well, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. The boss finished his dinner. First time since the missus and little Tommy passed. Ruthie paused, the knife in her hand suspended mid-slice over a tomato. The missus? Elizabeth? She asked softly. Pete nodded, his gaze distant. It's been 4 years. An accident. Neurocore's tech. It took them both. The boss hasn't been the same since. He stopped, as if realizing he'd said too much. Keep doing what you did last night, Miss Carter. This place might need you more than you think. Ruthie stood in silence for a moment, still gripping Elizabeth's recipe notebook. She didn't know the whole story, but the tomato soup had seemed to unlock something small and fragile, but enough to make her want to keep going. She glanced out the window where the morning light bathed the garden in gold, and thought to herself, if one meal can do that, I'll cook 100 more. The kitchen, once abandoned, was now the place where Ruthie began planting seeds of hope, not just for herself, but perhaps for the man still trapped in silent grief. Tuesday afternoon at the Langston estate arrived with a chill wind sweeping down from the mountains, slipping through window cracks and sending a shiver through Ruthie Carter as she stepped onto the glossy wooden staircase leading to the second floor. In her hands were a cleaning cloth and a bottle of solution, part of the cleaning duties Pete Hammond had assigned her that morning. The upstairs needs tidying, he had said, voice flat but eyes betraying a flicker of hesitation. Except for the locked rooms. You'll know them when you see them. Ruthie nodded, asking no questions, though her curiosity about the estate and about Wade Langston was growing by the day. The second floor was larger than she had expected, with a long marble-tiled hallway lined with intricately carved oak doors. Light streamed through tall windows, painting abstract patterns of shadow and sun on the walls. Ruthie started with the first room, a small library with ceiling-high bookshelves filled with the faint scent of old paper and leather. She dusted carefully, mindful not to disturb the meticulously arranged volumes. The task gave her a momentary escape from the worries that still lingered. Of the scandal that ruined her career, and of Wade's cold stare every time their paths crossed. After finishing 2 more rooms, a cozy sitting area, and a sparse office with a bare wooden desk, Ruthie paused before a door at the end of the hall. It wasn't locked, but the brass doorknob was cold to the touch, as though it hadn't been handled in a long time. She hesitated, remembering Pete's warning about locked rooms, but this one clearly wasn't. Maybe just a storage space, she reasoned, and gently turned the knob. The door creaked open to reveal a room bathed in muted light filtering through half-drawn curtains. It was a child's bedroom, a small bed with a space-themed blanket, bookshelves lined with comic books and model planes, and a little desk scattered with colored pencils. On the wall hung hand-drawn pictures, stars, planets, and a family of 3 holding hands, that made Ruthie's heart tighten. She knew instantly this was Tommy's room, the late son Wade had lost in the tragedy Pete had mentioned. The space, though clean, held a heavy stillness, as if time had stopped the day the boy left. Ruthie stepped inside, without really meaning to, drawn by the thin layer of dust on the desk. She picked up a toy spaceship, a silver plastic one, and ran her fingers gently over its worn edges, as if feeling the echo of small hands that once held it countless times. Suddenly, footsteps behind her made her whirl around, heart pounding. Wade stood in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. His eyes, usually cold, now burned with fury that made Ruthie instinctively step back. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was low but sharp as a blade. Without waiting for her answer, he strode forward, snatched the toy from her hand, and slammed the window shut, making the curtains shudder. "No one is allowed in here, no one." Ruthie froze, breath catching. I'm sorry," she stammered, voice shaking. "I didn't know. The door wasn't locked. I thought it just needed cleaning." Her explanation faded into the silence as Wade turned away, gripping the toy so tightly his knuckles went white. She expected to be fired on the spot, but instead he stood there, shoulders trembling slightly, as if fighting a storm within. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This time she didn't run, didn't retreat like she had when false accusations drove her from her old life. Instead, she stepped toward the bookshelf, straightened a comic that had slid sideways, and then turned to him, her voice gentle but resolute. "I understand," she said. "Some memories shouldn't be left to gather dust. I won't enter this room again, unless you want me to." Wade turned to face her. His eyes, still sharp, now carried something else. Surprise. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a housekeeper, but as a person with a soul of her own. He said nothing, only placed the toy spaceship back on the desk, slowly, almost ceremonially. Then he left the room, closing the door behind him, this time without slamming it. Ruthie stood in the hallway, still gripping the cleaning cloth. She didn't quite know what had just happened, but she felt something shift, like she had brushed against a deep hidden wound in Wade, and instead of being pushed away, had been quietly allowed to stay a little closer. She returned to her work, wiping down the hall, but her mind lingered in that room, where a boy's memory lived, shielded by a wall of silent pain. That evening, as she prepared dinner, beef stew with herbs, inspired by Elizabeth's recipe notebook, Ruthie realized she was thinking of Wade not just as a cold employer, but as a man carrying a grief too heavy to share. As she placed the dish on the dining room table, she hoped, however faintly, that this meal might open another door, however small, inside the heart he had long since locked away. The light on the second Monday morning at the Langston estate felt softer, as if the cold winds from the mountains had finally made room for a rare warmth of autumn. Ruthie Carter stood in the now familiar kitchen, her fingers brushing over the worn pages of Elizabeth's recipe notebook she had discovered the week before. The delicate handwriting wasn't just a collection of dishes, it was fragments of a life that had been lost. Ruthie felt a strange connection to the woman she had never met, as if every meal she prepared from the notebook was a whispered message from the past. That morning, while organizing the spice rack, Ruthie accidentally knocked open an old drawer. As she bent down to gather the fallen jars of herbs, she spotted another notebook, smaller and bound in dark brown leather, wedged at the bottom. She opened it, heart quickening as she realized this wasn't a recipe book. It was Elizabeth Langston's personal journal. The first line read, "March 12th, Tommy asked for a hamburger for his 6th birthday. Wade laughed the entire evening because the boy got sauce all over his face." Ruthie smiled, but the warmth quickly gave way to a pang of sadness. She flipped through the pages, reading Elizabeth's reflections on her son, her love for Wade, and even cryptic technical notes related to NeuroCore. The company Ruthie knew had something to do with the family's tragedy. One passage, underlined in red ink, made Ruthie pause. "Protect Tommy's project. He deserves to live again through it." The phrase "live again" sent a chill down her spine. What was Tommy's project? Was it connected to the accident Pete had mentioned? She wasn't sure, but that entry, interspersed with recipes and personal musings, made it clear that Elizabeth had tried to leave something behind, a part of herself and her son, for the world. Ruthie decided to cook the hamburger Tommy loved, described in detail in the journal. Grilled ground beef just right, homemade tomato sauce, one slice of melted cheddar. She wanted to honor the memory, even if only through a meal. Ruthie spent the afternoon preparing. She ground the fresh beef Pete had brought from town, mixing it with herbs and spices just as Elizabeth had written. The scent of sizzling meat filled the kitchen, blending with the gentle bubbling of the tomato sauce on the stove. She toasted the buns until golden, added cheddar and crisp lettuce, and arranged everything neatly on the plate. She also made crispy fries, lightly salted, just like Elizabeth had noted. Tommy always asked for extra. At precisely 6:30, Ruthie set the table in the grand dining room, her heart pounding with quiet anticipation. Wade entered at 7 sharp, as always, dressed in his familiar black suit. But this time, he paused when he saw the meal. His storm gray eyes hovered over the plate of hamburgers, and for a brief second, something flickered across his face. Surprise quickly buried beneath his usual cold demeanor. He sat down and picked up his utensils, but didn't eat right away. "Where did you find this recipe?" he asked, voice low and cautious. Ruthie, standing in the corner, took a steadying breath. "I found a notebook in the kitchen. It seemed to belong to Mrs. Langston. This one looks special, so I thought I'd try it." She hesitated, afraid she had crossed a line. If it's not appropriate, I can make something else. Wade didn't respond immediately. He stared at the plate for a long moment, as if facing a memory made real. Then he picked up the burger and took a small bite. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft clink of utensils. Ruthie watched him closely. He ate slowly, but he didn't stop. When the plate was nearly empty, he suddenly stood, but instead of leaving like he usually did, he pulled out the chair across from him and gestured toward her. "Sit," he said, his voice rough. "You made this. You should eat too." Ruthie blinked, stunned, but obeyed. She sat with the plate she had prepared for herself. They ate in silence, but the room no longer felt as cold. As Wade took his final bite, he looked out the window, where the forest glowed in the soft amber of sunset. "Tommy loved this," he murmured, voice so low it was almost a whisper. "He once said it was better than pizza." Elizabeth. She always laughed when he said that. He paused as if the words had taken all his strength. Ruthie didn't know what to say, but she felt the weight of the moment. "He must have been a special boy," she said gently. "And Mrs. Langston, she must have been extraordinary to create meals like this." Wade nodded, his expression softening for the first time. "She was." He rose from the table and turned to go, but paused at the doorway. "Thank you, Ruthie." It was the first time he had ever said her name, and the sound of it stunned her. As Wade left the room, Ruthie remained seated, her hands still wrapped around her utensils. She looked at Elizabeth's journal, still resting on the kitchen counter, and felt a deepening bond with this place. The journal wasn't just pages of ink and paper. It was a bridge between past and present, between grief and hope. Tonight's meal, though simple, had unlocked a door in Wade's tightly shut heart, and Ruthie vowed to keep stepping through it, one dish, one memory, one small gesture at a time. The 10th morning at the Langston estate began with a sense of unease, despite the rare autumn sunlight pouring through the glass windows, illuminating the marble hallways. Ruthie Carter was in the kitchen preparing lunch. A pan-seared salmon with passion fruit sauce inspired by a note in Elizabeth's journal. The aroma of herbs and grilled fish offered a momentary sense of peace, but that peace was swiftly shattered when the doorbell rang, sharp, sudden, and jarring, like an omen. Pete Hammond, the estate's caretaker, appeared in the kitchen doorway, his weathered face etched with tension. "You'll want to stay here," he said in a low voice. "The boss has a guest. He asked you not to leave the kitchen until called." Ruthie nodded, though curiosity tugged at her. She peeked out the window and spotted a sleek black car parked at the main gate. A man stepped out, confident in a sharp gray suit, perfectly groomed hair, and a thin, chilling smile. There was something about him that unsettled her, a familiar air that stirred an old memory. In the estate's main sitting room, Wade Langston sat across from Silas Morton, CEO of Nexavantage, a rival tech conglomerate. Silas spoke first, his voice smooth but razor-edged. "Wade, you know I didn't come here for small talk. NeuroCore is a jewel, one you've left collecting dust for too long. I'm proposing a friendly acquisition. Nexavantage will take over. You keep a stake, and everyone wins." Wade, eyes steely and unreadable, answered flatly, "NeuroCore isn't for sale." Just outside the room, Ruthie paused with a silver tray of water, per Pete's request, but froze when she recognized Silas's voice. 2 years ago, she had met him at a culinary event in San Francisco, where he had manipulated her best friend into taking the fall for a scandal, getting her fired based on false accusations. Silas Morton, infamous for underhanded tactics in business and a predator of weaknesses. A wave of dread rose inside Ruthie, pulling her back to the dark days when her own ex-fiancé had framed her and destroyed her name. When the meeting ended, Silas exited the room, only to pause when he saw Ruthie nearby. His smile sharpened. "Miss Carter, isn't it?" he said smoothly, his tone sweet yet tinged with menace. "We've never officially met, but I know quite a bit about you and your past." Before she could respond, he gestured for her to follow him out to the front veranda. There, with no one else around, he pulled a folder from his leather briefcase and handed it to her. "A legal declaration," he said, "from your former fiancé, claiming you had an affair and destroyed his family. I imagine the media would enjoy this story. The blood drained from Ruthie's face. She flipped through the documents, recognizing the familiar lies. Accusations she had spent years trying to refute, yet which never fully disappeared. "This is fabricated," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He lied, and you know that." Silas shrugged, his smirk unchanging. "Truth doesn't matter, Miss Carter. What the public believes does. I want Neurocore, and you're going to help me convince Wade to sell it. Otherwise, this hits every major outlet tomorrow morning." With that, he turned and strolled back to his car, leaving Ruthie standing frozen, the folder trembling in her hands. Back in the kitchen, her mind spun. The past, something she thought she had outrun, was threatening to destroy her all over again. She considered walking away, leaving everything behind before Silas's storm could hit. But then she remembered Wade's eyes as he ate the hamburger she made for Tommy, the gravel in his voice when he had said her name for the first time. She couldn't walk away. Not now. Not from him. Not from the fragile bond they were beginning to form. That evening, Ruthie prepared dinner, pasta with pesto and shrimp. But her thoughts weren't in the kitchen. When she brought the plate into the dining room, Wade was already seated. This time, though, he didn't reach for his utensils right away. He looked at her, his gaze sharper than usual. "Something's wrong," he said, voice low but not cold. "Is it Silas?" She hesitated, wanting to tell him about the threat, about the file, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she forced a smile. "It's just been a long day," she said quietly. Wade didn't press further, but his eyes lingered on her, as though searching for something unspoken. He ate in silence, but before leaving he murmured a quiet, "Thank you." Alone in the empty room, Ruthie sat down, her hand still clutching Silas's folder. She knew she was standing at a crossroads, surrender to manipulation or fight for what she was building here. Not just a job, but a sense of belonging. She looked out the window, where night had fallen over the mountains, and made a silent promise. This time she would not let her past define her future. Not again. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Night fell over the Langston estate, wrapping the house in a heavy stillness, broken only by the wind whistling through the pine trees outside. Ruthie Carter stood in the kitchen, the soft glow of the overhead pendant light casting shadows on her face, where worry had etched itself deep. The forged documents from Silas Morton, lies from her ex-fiancé, lay on the counter like a ghost from the past, threatening to unravel everything she'd started to rebuild here. She had spent the entire day torn. Should she leave, avoiding the media storm Silas had promised, or stay and face the terror of being exposed again? The kitchen, once her sanctuary, now felt stifling. Ruthie clutched Elizabeth's journal, as if the pages might somehow guide her. She thought of Wade, the way he looked at her while eating Tommy's favorite burger, the rasp in his voice when he first said her name. And in that moment, she knew she didn't want to run. Not this time. But if she was going to stay, she had to face the truth, not just with Silas, but with Wade himself. That night, Ruthie prepared a simple meal, herb-roasted chicken with mashed potatoes, based on another one of Elizabeth's recipes. She set the table in the grand dining room, though her mind was miles away. When Wade entered, precisely at 7 as always, he paused and studied her face. "You're not okay," he said. Not a question, but a quiet statement. His voice was low, but for the first time, it carried a trace of concern rather than coldness. Ruthie hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the tablecloth. She wanted to lie, to deflect, but his gaze, sharp but not judging, made it impossible to dodge. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice shaky. Wade sat down, nodding for her to continue but offering no pressure. She took a deep breath, like standing at the edge of a cliff. "I used to be a chef in San Francisco," she began, eyes fixed on the table. "I worked at a top restaurant at Étoile. I loved it. But 2 years ago, my fiancé, he framed me. He said I faked ingredient sourcing, sabotaged the restaurant, even had affairs to get promoted. None of it was true, but no one believed me. I lost my job, my friends, everything." Her voice broke, but she pushed on. Yesterday, Silas Morton came here. He brought a document, a fake declaration from that man. He threatened to release it to the press if I didn't convince you to sell Neurocore. She stopped, bracing herself for anger, suspicion, or worse, indifference. But Wade just watched her, eyes locked on hers as though weighing each word. Silence filled the room, save for the wind beyond the window panes. Then Wade stood and walked toward her. He didn't touch her at first, just stood close enough for her to feel his presence, steady and grounding amidst the storm raging inside her. "I don't care what he says," Wade said, voice low but firm. "I believe what I see. A woman who stayed when everyone else left. You stayed here, Ruthie, when no one else could. That's the only truth I need." His words anchored her, stopping her from drifting back into fear. Ruthie looked up, her eyes blurry with unshed tears, but she didn't cry. What she felt now wasn't shame, but strength, not from hiding the past, but from being accepted in spite of it. Wade reached up, his fingers gently brushing her cheek, a touch so tender it caught her off guard. His hand was warm, the opposite of the cold image she once had of him. And in that stillness, time seemed to pause. He leaned in, and their lips met, a soft, unhurried kiss filled with meaning. It wasn't just comfort, it was a quiet promise of shared healing. When they pulled apart, Ruthie felt lighter, even though fear still lingered about what Silas might do. But Wade looked at her, and there was something new in his expression, something open, vulnerable. "You don't have to face him alone," he said. "We'll figure it out." He didn't offer grand promises, but those simple words were enough to make her feel like she wasn't standing alone anymore. After Wade left the dining room, Ruthie remained, her fingers brushing the spot on her cheek where he had touched her. She looked out the window where darkness cloaked the mountains. But this time, the dark didn't scare her. Wade's kiss hadn't erased her wounds, but it reminded her that wounds could be shared. She picked up the folder Silas had left, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a weight too heavy to bear. With Wade beside her, she began to believe that truth, however painful, could be her greatest weapon. The soft morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of the Langston estate, casting a golden hue across the kitchen as if trying to soothe the tension clouding Ruthie Carter's thoughts. After the unexpected kiss with Wade the night before, she felt a new connection growing between them, but the looming threat of Silas Morton still hung like a shadow. The forged declaration he had left behind sat tucked away in a kitchen drawer, out of sight but far from forgotten. Ruthie knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. She needed to protect not just herself, but also Wade and the legacy of Neurocore. Something she felt increasingly connected to, even if she didn't yet fully understand it. That morning, while organizing a cluttered storage area in the basement at Pete's request, Ruthie stumbled upon a small door hidden behind a shelf stacked with old supplies. It wasn't locked, but the rusted handle suggested it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity piqued, she pushed the door open and stepped into a small, dust-covered room, lined with old filing shelves and a steel safe in the corner. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from a strange intuition that something important lay within. She turned the safe's dial without much hope, but to her surprise, it clicked open with a soft creak, as if it had been waiting to be discovered. Inside was a thick stack of papers wrapped in a brown leather envelope, alongside a few faded family photos. Ruthie picked up one, a young blonde boy, clearly Tommy, beaming beside Wade and Elizabeth. She set the photo aside and focused on the papers. The first few pages were legal documents outlining that the intellectual property of Neurocore, including its core patents and AI project source codes, had been officially registered under Tommy Langston's name. The clause stated that any sale or transfer of ownership would require court approval, ensuring protection for the interests of the deceased heir. Skimming the documents, Ruthie realized this made a hostile takeover nearly impossible without lengthy legal proceedings. It was a wall Silas would have to climb, a wall she and Wade could now defend. She brought the file upstairs to Wade's office, where he sat reviewing graphs on his computer screen. When he looked up and saw her, the usual chill in his expression softened. "What is it, Ruthie?" he asked, his voice low but no longer distant. She placed the folder on his desk. "I found this in a safe in the basement," she said, steady. It's the intellectual property contract for NeuroCore, registered under Tommy's name. Elizabeth set it up to protect the company. If Silas wants to take over, he'll have to go through the courts, and that won't be easy. Wade opened the folder, flipping through the pages with intense focus. His expression shifted as he reached the signature line, where Elizabeth's name was written in firm ink. Emotion flickered across his face. She always thought of Tommy first, he said, voice thick with feeling. She wanted this company to be his legacy, not mine. He looked up at Ruthie with newfound respect. You found this. You did what I couldn't. Ruthie shook her head. It was just luck. But we can use this. If we have the law on our side, Silas can't win. Wade nodded, and for the first time, a small smile broke across his face. Brief, but real. We, he repeated, as though the word meant something new now. Together, they sat down to study the documents, planning their next steps. Wade explained that while NeuroCore was no longer actively developing new projects, it still held valuable patents, especially one AI system Elizabeth had once mentioned in her journal. It had the ability to personalize data processing on a human level, something that could revolutionize the industry. Silas wanted it to cement Nexadvantage's dominance. For the first time, Ruthie felt herself changing, from someone once victimized by lies to someone now defending a legacy. She suggested contacting a lawyer Pete had connections with back in San Francisco to begin building a case. Wade agreed, and for the first time, they worked as a team, sharing ideas, building strategy. The office, once a cold, sterile space, now pulsed with quiet energy and shared purpose. As sunset bathed the estate in warm amber, Ruthie returned to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Braised ribs with red wine reduction, inspired by yet another of Elizabeth's recipes. When she set the table, she didn't retreat to the corner of the dining room like a servant. When Wade entered, he gestured for her to sit opposite him again. They ate with a quiet ease, no longer weighed down by the silences of the past. You're not just a great cook, Ruthie, Wade said gently. You're a fighter. I'm lucky to have you here. His words made her heart race. She smiled, feeling strength not just from the documents she'd found, but from his trust in her. When dinner ended and she stood to clear the plates, Ruthie paused by the window. The mountains were touched with gold from the final light of day. Silas Morton was still a threat, but for the first time, Ruthie didn't feel like she was fighting alone. The papers in the safe weren't just a legal weapon. They were proof of Elizabeth and Tommy's legacy, and now a reason for Ruthie and Wade to stand united. Night descended over the Langston estate, wrapping the mountains in a dense, suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint glow of solar lights along the rooftop. Ruthie Carter stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner, roast beef with truffle mushroom sauce, inspired once again by Elizabeth's journal. But her thoughts weren't entirely on the dish. After uncovering the legal documents protecting NeuroCore, she and Wade had spent the day contacting lawyers and assembling a case to stop Silas Morton's hostile attempt at a takeover. Hope had begun to stir, but Ruthie could still feel Silas's presence, like a storm gathering at the edge of the horizon. Suddenly, a sharp explosion rang out from the back of the estate, followed by the acrid sting of smoke. Ruthie dropped her knife and ran into the hallway, where Pete Hammond was shouting, "Server room! There's a fire!" Her pulse surged as she sprinted after him. When they reached the server vault, an enclosed room lined with racks of advanced NeuroCore equipment, black smoke billowed from one corner, flames licking at the tangled cables. Wade appeared moments later, his face pale but focused, eyes blazing like a soldier stepping onto the battlefield. "Call the fire department," he ordered Pete before turning to Ruthie. "Go back to the kitchen. It's safer there." But Ruthie shook her head. A spark of memory flashed. Elizabeth's journal had mentioned an automated data backup system designed specifically to protect NeuroCore's core AI projects. "I can save the data," Ruthie said, breathless but firm. Before Wade could argue, she dashed into the adjacent control room, where one computer screen still glowed through the smoke. The air grew thick and stung her eyes, but Ruthie stayed focused. She found the backup program, its interface elegant and precise, unmistakably Elizabeth's creation. With a few rapid keystrokes, She initiated the transfer, directing the files to a hidden external drive locked inside a steel safe within the server vault. Alarms screamed as the flames grew, but Ruthie remained until the screen displayed, "Backup complete." She grabbed the drive, shielded it in her jacket, and bolted outside where Wade and Pete were fighting the fire with extinguishers. Firefighters arrived minutes later and managed to contain the blaze before it spread to the rest of the estate. When the smoke finally cleared, Wade surveyed the damage, his face darkening at the sight of the server room, nearly reduced to ashes. Ruthie stepped forward, her hands still trembling as she handed him the drive. "The data's safe," she said, her voice shaky with adrenaline. "Elizabeth's system. It worked." Wade looked at her, stunned. Gratitude and disbelief shone in his eyes. "You did the impossible," he murmured. Later, as firefighters departed and the night grew quiet again, Wade and Ruthie sat together in his office, surrounded by the broken remains of a terrifying night. Pete returned from speaking with the fire chief, his face grim. "This wasn't accidental," he confirmed. "They found accelerants. It was arson." Wade clenched his fists, his jaw tight with fury. "Silas," he growled, voice sharp as steel. "He thinks he can break me like this." Ruthie reached out and gently touched his hand, grounding him. "He won't win," she said softly. "We have the data. We have the legal protection. He can't take NeuroCore." Wade looked at her, something shifting behind his gaze, like he was seeing her for the first time, truly. He stood, walked to a corner of the room, and picked up a piece of scorched metal, one of the few remnants from the server vault. Holding it tightly, his expression hardened into resolve. "I've lost everything once," he said, his voice quiet but raw. "But tonight, you showed me there's still something worth holding on to. Ruthie, I don't want to do this alone anymore." Ruthie's breath caught as Wade dropped to one knee, the charred metal still in his hand, his eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "I don't have a ring. All I have is this. Burned metal, a piece of what we survived tonight. But I promise to rebuild everything with you, piece by piece, from the ashes." His voice was hoarse but full of sincerity. "Ruthie Carter, will you stay with me, not just tonight, but for the rest of our lives?" Her heart stilled. In his eyes, she didn't just see a proposal. She saw a vow, a future they would face together, side by side, no matter the storm still to come. Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was steady. "Yes, Wade," she whispered, "I'll stay." He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. They stood there, wrapped in each other, in a room still smelling faintly of smoke, but now infused with hope. That night, as Ruthie returned to the kitchen to clean up, she paused by the window. The moon cast its silver light across the mountain ridge, and she saw the scorched piece of metal now resting beside the sink. Not a ring, but something more. A symbol of their promise, one forged in fire. Silas Morton was still out there, and the battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Ruthie felt ready to face whatever came next. Not alone. Never again. Morning bathed the Langston estate in a soft golden glow, but the air still carried the heaviness of the fire from the night before. Ruthie Carter stood in the kitchen, her fingers tracing the edges of Elizabeth's journal in search of comfort within its familiar lines. Wade Langston's proposal, made with nothing more than a scorched piece of metal and a heartfelt vow, still echoed in her chest like a steady drumbeat. Yet the joy of that moment was muted by the lingering threat of Silas Morton, who had gone so far as to set the server room ablaze to destroy NeuroCore. Ruthie knew the battle wasn't over. Silas wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. In the study, Wade sat before a row of surveillance monitors, his gray eyes sharp with focus. Since the fire, he'd committed himself to finding concrete proof that Silas was behind the arson. "He's overconfident," Wade told Ruthie as she handed him a cup of coffee. His voice was low but filled with resolve. "He thinks he can break us without leaving a trace, but I know how to find the truth." Ruthie nodded, feeling the weight of his determination, but anxiety still churned in her chest. Silas didn't just want NeuroCore. He held a weapon from her past, a fabricated scandal that could destroy everything she'd rebuilt. With the skill of a seasoned tech CEO, Wade combed through footage from the estate's security system. On one camera, a grainy feed from near the back gate. He spotted a figure dousing liquid near the server room. The image was blurry, but Wade recognized the gait, the tailored coat, the build. A former Nexavantage employee, he muttered. He contacted a private investigator in San Francisco, requesting a deep dive into the man's recent activity and any financial links to Silas. If we can tie this to him, Wade said, eyes blazing, he's finished. While Wade investigated, Ruthie's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained a link to an online article that made her stomach drop. The headline screamed, "Talented Chef or Homewrecker? The Dark Past of Ruthie Carter." It was published on a trashy gossip site but was spreading fast. The article cited the forged legal declaration from her ex-fiancé, accusing her of infidelity and sabotaging Etoile. Though she knew it was all lies, seeing it in print was like reliving the betrayal. Her hands trembled. She nearly dropped the phone. The world, it seemed, was turning on her again. She brought the article to Wade, her voice shaking. "Silas did it," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "He's trying to destroy me, to pressure you into selling Neurocore." But Wade didn't flinch. He took her hand, his gaze steady. "He doesn't realize how strong we are now," he said. "We won't let him control this narrative." Without delay, Wade called an old friend in media and arranged a press conference in San Francisco within hours. "We're going to tell our story before he twists it," he said. Ruthie hesitated, afraid to stand in front of the world, to face the public judgment again. But Wade's unwavering belief in her gave her strength. She nodded. She wouldn't let the past dictate her future. The press conference was held in a modest but packed venue. Cameras flashed, journalists buzzed. Wade took the stage, composed yet humble. He began by presenting the legal documents that protected Neurocore, explaining how the company was registered in Tommy's name to preserve the legacy of his late son. He described the fire, presented preliminary evidence of arson, and vowed to pursue justice. Then, with Ruthie standing beside him, he reached for her hand. "As for Ruthie Carter," he said, his voice deep and clear, "she was lied about, betrayed, and cast out. But what I see in her is a woman who never gave up. She brought light back into a home I once believed would be dark forever. If her past is a stain, then I'm proud to stand beside her as we clear it, together, with truth and with love." The room fell silent. Then thunderous applause erupted. Ruthie stood tall, tears slipping down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. She felt Wade's words reverberate through her like armor. The questions that followed weren't about scandal. Reporters asked about Neurocore, about Tommy, and about the bond between Wade and Ruthie. Silas's attempt to smear her had backfired spectacularly. Their truth had captured the public's heart. That evening back at the estate, Ruthie and Wade sat in the dining room, the flicker of a candle dancing between them. Wade handed her a sheet of paper, an early report from the private investigator. It confirmed the man in the security footage had recently received a large payment from a Nexavantage account. "We're taking this to court," Wade said, his voice steady and firm. Ruthie nodded, feeling the weight begin to lift. Silas had unleashed a storm, but Wade had turned it into their fuel. She squeezed his hand, feeling safe, seen, and unshakably supported. For the first time in years, Ruthie no longer feared her past. With Wade beside her, she was ready to face the final battle, and whatever came after. The soft winter sunlight spilled over Langston Estate, bathing the glass walls and lush gardens in a gentle golden hue. Ruthie Carter stood in the kitchen, where she had found not only her love for cooking, but a new sense of purpose. Her fingers brushed over Elizabeth's journal, its pages now like an old friend, telling the story of a family once full of love and loss. After the press conference in San Francisco, where Wade publicly defended her against Silas Morton's smear campaign, Ruthie felt a new strength, not just from Wade's love, but from the belief that truth could overcome manipulation. Still, the battle with Silas wasn't over, and she knew Wade was putting everything on the line to ensure justice would be served. Over the past week, Wade had worked tirelessly with a private investigator and a team of attorneys to solidify their case against Silas. From the blurry footage of the man near the server room, the investigator traced a bank account linked to a former Nexavantage employee, who confessed that Silas had paid him to start the fire. Moreover, leaked internal emails, obtained from a reliable source, confirmed that Silas had orchestrated the media attack on Ruthie, using falsified documents in an attempt to pressure Wade into selling Neurocore. Each piece of evidence became part of a clear picture of Silas's crimes. That morning, Wade and Ruthie went to the San Francisco Police Department, carrying a meticulously prepared file of evidence. In a small meeting room, Wade presented the footage, financial records, and emails. The lead officer nodded solemnly. "This is undeniable proof," he said. "We'll be arresting Silas Morton today." Under the table, Ruthie gripped Wade's hand, feeling a mix of relief and resolve in his squeeze. By the time they left the station, news of the arrest warrant had already spread. The headlines that once slandered Ruthie were now telling the story of a corrupt CEO's downfall. Justice, at last, had arrived. Back at Langston Estate, Wade called an emergency meeting with Neurocore's old advisory board, those who had remained loyal after he stepped down as CEO. Standing before them in the study, his expression was steady, yet more peaceful than ever. "Neurocore is more than just a company," he said. "It was Elizabeth and Tommy's dream, a dream of using technology to serve humanity, not just to build wealth." Then he made a bold announcement. He would release all of Neurocore's intellectual property, including the personalized AI project named after Tommy, as open-source technology, free for anyone to use. Tommy's project will live on, not locked away in a corporate vault, but in the hands of those who truly need it. The decision sparked debate. One advisor objected, reminding him that Neurocore's patents were worth millions and could bring in enormous profits. But Wade shook his head. "I lost my family because of this technology," he said quietly. "I won't let it become a tool for greed. Tommy and Elizabeth deserve to be remembered for something better." Ruthie, standing beside him, felt a deep pride swell within her. She knew this wasn't just a financial sacrifice. It was Wade's way of healing, of transforming pain into hope for others. The open-source project quickly gained attention from researchers, nonprofits, and global communities, promising impact in education, healthcare, and beyond. Amid the whirlwind following their legal victory, Wade and Ruthie received an unexpected call from a children's shelter in San Francisco. A 10-year-old orphan named Ethan was in need of a home. The representative shared that Ethan had once met Elizabeth at a Neurocore charity event where she'd given him a model spaceship, identical to the one in Tommy's room. The story touched Ruthie's heart. When she told Wade, he fell silent for a long moment, eyes distant. "Maybe this is Tommy's way of sending us a new beginning," he whispered. They went to meet Ethan, and the moment they saw the boy, with his bright eyes and shy smile, he stole their hearts. Within weeks after completing the necessary paperwork, Ethan officially became their adopted son, a symbol of the Langston family's rebirth. Their wedding took place on a crisp winter day in the estate's garden, where Elizabeth's flowers still bloomed. Pete Hammond, the ever-loyal steward, officiated, pride shining in his eyes. Sarah, Ruthie's best friend, beamed as maid of honor, watching her walk down the aisle in a simple white dress. Ethan, in a tiny tailored suit, stood beside Wade, clutching his hand, his eyes wide with wonder at the garden that now felt like his own magical world. The local community, once distant from the estate, gathered to celebrate, as if the mansion had become a symbol of healing. As Ruthie and Wade exchanged vows, he held her hands tightly, his gaze glowing. "Ruthie, you brought the light back to this place," he said, "and with Ethan, we're building a new family, one Tommy and Elizabeth would be proud of." Ruthie smiled through her tears, feeling not only Wade's love, but Ethan's, as the boy grinned up at them. Pete hung a new sign at the gates, Langston Estate, a house of second chances, a testament to everything they had overcome. That night, on their wedding night, Ruthie stood in the kitchen, light from the chandelier casting warm shadows across the table, where she had once prepared her first meals for Wade. Ethan ran in, holding a drawing he'd just finished, of a family of 3 standing under a starry sky, much like the ones in Tommy's old room. "I made it for you and Dad," he said, voice soft but warm. Wade knelt, wrapping Ethan in a hug. "If Tommy were here, He'd love you so much, he whispered. Ruthie placed Elizabeth's journal on the shelf, as if to honor the past that had led them to this very moment. They stepped out into the garden, where moonlight silvered the leaves. Ethan raced ahead, laughing as he chased a firefly. Wade took Ruthie's hand, eyes full of hope. "We did it," he said. "We kept our promise to Tommy and Elizabeth, and now we have Ethan." Langston Estate, once a place of sorrow, was now overflowing with life, a true home built on love, justice, and second chances. Ruthie leaned into Wade, knowing the road ahead would still be long, but they would walk it together, with Ethan as the new light in their family.